Hi, my name is Wesley Lawton, and I'm a Grief Support Services Manager with Hospice of Michigan in Macomb County, and one of the co-facilitators of the Men Overcoming Loss Grief Support Group. We meet 2 Tuesdays in a month, the first and third Tuesday of each month, or at least we have been, I should correct myself. We'll be meeting only the third Tuesday in December, and this recording is going up at the end of November here. And then starting in January, we're starting to have 3 men's groups available. There will be a general Men Overcoming Loss group on the first Tuesday of each month. And that group, while any adult man is welcome to join who is going through grief after a death of a loved one, we are promoting it especially to those who have lost people in their lives who are not spouses or children. The reason for that is that the other 2 groups address those specific losses. And we really want to have a place so that people who have other types of losses, such as parents, siblings, friends, whatever it might be, have a place where they feel they can connect with others with similar types of losses. So if you'd like to come to the general men's group and you've lost a child or a spouse, you are welcome. But it's just something that we are going to be keeping an eye on. We really want to be able to have a place for every man who wants to connect with other men going through grief. So again, the other groups include, there's a grieving fathers group, or of course, a loss of child group for men, which is going to be the first Wednesday of each month. I should note that the general men's group on the first Tuesday of each month will be starting in February. And the first Wednesday group, the loss of child group, will be starting in January. Finally, we will be doing a men's loss of spouse group. Most of the guys in our group at this time have lost a spouse. And so I hope and expect that most of them will be joining us at the men's loss of spouse group, if not other groups, if applicable as well. That'll be continuing on the third Tuesday of each month. All of these groups take place from 6 p.m. to 7:30. So hopefully that's clear. You can look on our website, hom.org, and up at the top, click Grief Support. And from there, you can navigate to all of our grief support groups. And we'll have updated info on that very soon, I'm sure sometime in December. Now, that being said, we hope that you'll join us for some of those. It's great to connect with other guys and talk about how these topics can apply to our lives. I know there was a gentleman who joined us recently who joined because he had been watching some of these videos. And so I'm glad to hear that it's worth the time to record them and that they're helpful for some folks and even encouraging some guys to come out and join our group and connect and support the others and receive support. The topic today is boundaries after a loss. I wanted to talk about this because it's an issue that's very important to me. I think it's kind of underrated in general. It's an issue that everybody faces, whether you're grieving or not, whether you're a man or not. But I think that it's especially salient, especially relevant heading into the holiday season, and especially after the recent death of a loved one. And I'll explain why as we get into the presentation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. There we go. Okay, boundaries after a loss. Now, let me say right off the bat, if I can advance the slide here. There we go. That this, a lot of the thoughts in this presentation, some of them come from my own thoughts and observations, but many of them also come, I would say probably the majority come from, are inspired by this book, which I have here on my Kindle. I'm going to read a little excerpt at the beginning. And so the book, as you can see, is Boundaries: When to Say Yes, How to Say No, and Take Control of Your Life. And it's by Drs. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. This is the best book about boundaries that I am aware of. I believe it was originally written in the 90s. I could be wrong about that. And the one caveat that I feel that I need to share with people is that it is written from a very Christian and Bible-based kind of perspective. Now, it does such a good job talking about boundaries that I still recommend it to people who are not interested in those aspects, or even people who are turned off by those aspects and find that to be a problem, simply because if even if you look past all of the sort of biblical reasons for setting these boundaries and ideas behind them, the other content is just that good. So now, of course, it can be difficult at times to look past that if that's something that you feel you need to do, simply because it's prevalent throughout most of the chapters. So I just need to let you know about that, and if anybody knows of a book on boundaries that rivals this one, that would be maybe more accessible and I guess comfortable for secular audiences, please send me an email at wlawton@hom.org. That's WLAWTON as in Nancy at HOM as in Michigan.org. Or feel free to contact me if there's other questions that you have, other ways that I can support you in your grief. So let me carry on from there now that that credit has been given. What are boundaries? So here's where I read the example from the book. And I think this is the only spot where I directly quote from it, because I think that this is a great example. So in this part of the book, there's a hypothetical, I guess maybe a therapist, let's see, or a counselor of some kind talking to two parents who are having troubles with their young adult son and their boundary issues. So the counselor says, look at it this way. It's as if he's your neighbor who never waters his lawn. But whenever you turn on your sprinkler system, the water falls on his lawn. Your grass is turning brown and dying, but Bill, the son, looks down at his green grass and thinks to himself, my yard is doing fine. That is how your son's life is. He doesn't study or plan or work, yet he has a nice place to live, plenty of money, and all the rights of a family member who is doing his part. If you would define the property lines a little better, if you would fix the sprinkler system so that the water would fall on your lawn, and if he didn't water his own lawn, he would have to live in dirt. He might not like that after a while. As it stands now, he is irresponsible and happy, and you are responsible and miserable. A little boundary clarification would do the trick. You need some fences to keep his problems out of your yard and in his, where they belong. Now, I'm guessing that to some people, that example might sound just a little bit harsh. Maybe to others, maybe not so much. And so I'll talk about that sort of feeling of harshness as we go on in the presentation as well. Boundaries really include a lot of different ideas, and do my best to explain it succinctly. But one of the main ones is natural consequences. It's basically when I take action, I should face the positive and negative consequences of that action. And let me move my picture up here so I don't keep looking to the right. When others take actions, then they face the consequences of those actions. That's what's appropriate. My actions, particularly focusing on negative consequences for a moment, my actions, and if they reap negative consequences, those should fall onto me so that I can learn from my mistakes, change my behavior, sort of face those consequences. Especially if I have done something irresponsible or dangerous, and those should not be falling onto somebody else. And likewise, their negative actions should not have consequences for me while they avoid those consequences. It's just better for me. It's better for them, regardless of what's going on. That's a good rule of thumb for how things should work. And again, I'll share some sort of disclaimers to that, because that's a rule of thumb. That's not a hard and fast rule the way it should always go necessarily. Another metaphor, of course, is carrying weight. I should not be constantly taking on everybody else's burdens while they do not carry their own. Let's continue with this metaphor, saying you're going on some kind of a journey and you've got a backpack. If I'm carrying all the weight all the time, I'm going to get bogged down. I'm going to run out of energy. I'm not going to be able to complete the journey. I'm going to burn out. Where the people around me If they're not carrying their weight, their backpack, they're not going to be ready for when I burn out. They're not going to be able to pick up their backpack and continue on, perhaps because they haven't built up the strength that they need as the journey goes on. So not perfect analogies, but I think you understand what I'm saying here. Um, and going back to the consequences, actually, I do want to just address this now. Uh, you know, we don't always have to let people face their negative consequences. I gave the example in the group about my 3-year-old running out towards the road. That is not a situation where I should allow him to face the natural consequences of his decisions. And that might be an extreme example, but you probably know people in your lives who, even adults, who don't know any better. And they're doing something that is going to be incredibly harmful and dangerous for them. In that kind of a situation, it might be a good idea to shield them from that in some way, while, of course, preventing harm to yourself as much as possible. So, we should have grace on one another and not always allow people to face those consequences, out of love for our neighbors, for our family and friends. But it's where the harm comes in is when that becomes a pattern in our lives, where we're always shielding and coddling the people around us from the natural consequences of their actions. And like the example alluded to in the book, that becomes sort of a lifestyle for us and for them. And it's really not healthy for anybody involved. So the question then is, who has the problem? Well, in the example in the book, the counselor talks about how, that the parents come in and say, our son has all these problems. And he's saying, well, your son doesn't sound like he has any problems. You have all the problems. And because you're not allowing your son to have any problems. And in order for things to get better for everybody involved, your son really needs to be able to have some problems in his life. Excuse me, I'm turning on Do Not Disturb here. Needs to be able to have some problems in his life so that he can basically learn to be an adult, and so that you don't get so overwhelmed by the consequences of his actions. And then, as I've said, shielding people from their consequences is not really helpful for them in the long term. They don't learn the things that they need to learn to be able to adapt to their situations. We're really putting them at a disadvantage in their lives by constantly shielding them from their consequences, by not having healthy boundaries. Okay, so some specific issues when it comes to boundaries to help understand a little bit better about what healthy boundaries look like. A big issue is thinking about where is my zone of control and where is somebody else's zone of control. I have, I think that our areas of control really only have to do with, like, mine is right here, my choices, and as somebody in the group pointed out, my thoughts. The things that take place inside me are largely within my control. And by the way, many people don't know that you actually do have control over your thoughts, or you can. And the choices that I make are within my control. I can't control other people's choices. I can't control their feelings. I can't even control the way that my actions make them feel. I don't have to necessarily, I can think about how my choices will make them feel. I can be aware of that and take that into consideration, but I can't control that. If I act in a certain way and it makes somebody else feel bad, I can't stop them from feeling bad. I can change my choices, but that has different results. So it's important to keep in mind. And likewise, if other people are expecting us to do certain things, ultimately, that's up to us whether or not we comply with that, whether we adhere to that, or whether we stop. And that is often, when there's sort of a spiral of bad boundaries and just a bad system for everybody, that's often where you can stop the buck, where you can interrupt that cycle, changing your choices, changing your behavior, and saying, I'm not going to do this. And, unless you're going to get violent with me or something like that, you really can't make me. And, maybe I'm going to distance myself from you in some way. Now, of course, there's some extreme examples where even those things can be difficult, but I'm talking about the regular day-to-day issues. It's important to recognize where our control lies and where somebody else's control lies. So as I shared earlier, we want to be loving neighbors to one another. We want to take care of each other. These are good things. And so I'm not talking about just looking out for number one and everybody else doing the same thing. I think that it's good to be interdependent on one another, as long as there's give and take, or giving and receiving. But when there's not a healthy system, that's where we need to take a look at whether or not we need to set up boundaries to make things work better for everybody. Certainly better for ourselves, because again, that's where we have control. I can't control your choices. If you're going to keep making things go badly in your own life, it's something that you need to choose to do otherwise, as hard as it can be. But thinking about the example in the book that I gave, or that I shared, about being neighbors to one another, neighbors help each other out, but they also have their area of responsibility. They have their yards and their homes and their things that they need to manage. And it ultimately should fall on them and be their responsibility. Can't always be expected to take care of somebody else's property while they're not doing anything to take care of theirs or yours. We need to protect and manage our own lives so that we're in a situation where we can continue to give to one another. So this is about being able to help one another in the long term in a way that is sustainable. It's not about being selfish. We talked in the group about the importance of no. And as Will shared, and I believe I've heard David share this in the group before as well, no is a complete sentence. We need to, we should expect our no's to be respected. And we should also respect the no's given by other people. The book I remember talks about the importance of, how kids from an early age, no is one of the first words that they often learn. And that no needs to be respected too. They need to learn that when they say no to something, other people should respect that and not do that thing, unless of course there's an issue where, their safety or their health is at risk. Their safety or their health is at risk. There are roles that we have as adults taking care of them, but just in general, we need to grow up with this idea that when I say no, other people need to stop what they're doing towards me. And a lot of us did not grow up that way. And so a lot of us do not understand the importance of no, and don't exercise that word, and don't have the expectation and the follow through to enforce it. Okay. Here are some examples of bad boundaries. Saying yes all the time to things, even when they're bad for us or for the people around us, or both. Once in a while, you might be in some kind of an extraneous situation where you need to say yes to something that's going to have bad consequences, I suppose, but that's really outside the rule. The rule should be that if something's going to have bad results, even if it's just for us, we are valuable. I'm a valuable person, and so are you, just as legitimate and valuable as everybody else. And so I need to be able to say no to those things. They're going to be harmful for me. But another example of bad boundaries is to go on the opposite end of the spectrum and to say no all the time. If you're saying no all the time, even to things that have a strong potential to be good in your life or good for the people around you in a way that's healthy, that's not exactly a healthy boundary either. That's like instead of a nice, healthy, flexible fence with a gate, or whatever kind of picture you might want to use for healthy boundaries, that's like a big, 20 foot deep by 50 foot high brick wall that doesn't allow anything through. And you're really shutting out a lot of the good that could be in your life and a lot of your relationships. One concept that I shared in the group that has just been really life-changing for me, and something that I'm glad that I learned at a relatively young age, is that To say yes to one thing is to say no to something else. Again, these concepts are all simple and hopefully very understandable, but a lot of us live as if we don't understand that it's true. If I am saying yes to, if I'm always saying yes to my work, for instance, as much as I love my work and I love my organization and my team, if I'm always saying yes, 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 I'll do that, I'll do this, I'll do that, that's my choice to do that. Nobody else has the responsibility to stop me from doing that. But if I'm always doing that, I'm saying no to my family. I'm saying no to, other hobbies and activities that I could be doing because I'm constantly working. So it's good to be aware of the areas where we're saying yes and to be intentional about it, to think about what do you value in your life and how can you use your yeses and your nos to organize your life around the things that you value and to try to have the best, healthiest balance in your life. Okay, another example of bad boundaries is not respecting others' boundaries. Uh, Again, you have control about your behaviors and your actions. So you might be watching this and thinking, well, I don't have a problem with people, stepping all over me whatsoever. But perhaps you are somebody who steps on other people and ignores their boundaries. It's something that a lot of us get wrapped up in. And so it's good to be able to recognize that so that you can address it if that's the case for you. There are different ways of not respecting other people's boundaries. The two of the biggest ones are ways that are aggressive, um, which of course is very straightforward, just plowing right over people saying no or other people's boundaries, or manipulative, which is trying to find a way around their boundaries in a way that still is not respecting of them as people with healthy boundaries. And I'm sure that we've all experienced aggressive and manipulative people who are not respecting us and our boundaries. And so it's important to look in the mirror and make sure that we're not being that person in a given situation, because that's not a good boundary. Another example is not listening to others' needs. Now, needs, as I acknowledged in the group, is sometimes, I think, kind of a therapeutic kind of a word that we're not as comfortable with in our modern, our day-to-day vernacular. Um, but another way of saying needs might be goals or wants. Now, of course, there is a difference between a want and a need, but what is it? What is the goal here? What is it that is important to me? Values is another word for needs. It's important to be able to share our needs with other people, and just as important to be able to listen to and respect their needs so that we can work towards our common goals and make compromises when appropriate so that we can lift one another up. Okay, so here's where I address, now that I've given a pretty, somewhat comprehensive introduction to boundaries and describing what they are. Here's where it comes into grief. When you lose a loved one, you're going through a period of extreme change. Anybody who's in this situation, I'm sure I don't need to tell you this. Um, any kind of change involves loss. And when you lose a loved one, that's a very big change. Anytime you have a major loss, it involves lots of change. And that involves a lot of loss, as well as a lot of creating, a lot of, redefining. When you lose a spouse, for as most of the guys in our group have, you've got to figure out, it used to be my name and their name. It used to be me and them. And now I've got to figure out who I am and what my life looks like now that they're not in my life in the way that they always have been. I'm not part of a couple, so to speak. I'm just on my own, and my life is upside down. Everything looks different, just about. And so I've got to do the work of sort of building that up. In some cases, it feels like from the ground level. It's very hard work, but it's really the only way to continue to have a fulfilling life, or to eventually work toward a fulfilling life. So when you're going through a lot of change, you're especially vulnerable. There's also a unique opportunity to build healthy boundaries in your life with your family. Sometimes I know I've talked to people who they've got kids, they've got other people in their life who want to step in and do things for them. And there's a way of doing that in a place where that is helpful and appreciated. And I encourage you to say yes to that good in your life, to allow people to do things for you, but also to be aware of the ways that that can take um, your independence and your control away. It's important to be able to allow people to help us and to support us, but also to maintain our independence and autonomy in ways that are appropriate. Um, and because it can, after a loss, it can look like other people taking care of you all the time, but you also become less and less free to make your own choices if it's not done in a way that's healthy and effective. So some examples you can see here on the screen of changes, changing roles. My father used to be this person in my life, and I don't have him filling that role anymore. And so I've got to figure out how I can get that role filled in some other way, or how to cope without that role in my life. The roles, I would say, the roles issue is especially important when it comes to losing a spouse or somebody who you live with on a day-to-day basis, roles within a family. Um, by the way, anytime that a family member dies within a family that interacts with one another, the whole system is thrown out of whack, and people sometimes feel fear and anxiety and anger and act in ways that they wouldn't normally act just because the system's out of whack and it just doesn't feel right in so many ways. People are looking to fill those roles or to have those roles filled. So it's important to practice good boundaries during all of that process. Identity changes, as I shared. We think of ourselves and other people think of us in relation to those important people in our lives. And so when somebody is in many ways removed from our life, uh, our identity, the way that we see ourselves and the way that other people see us, has to go through some kind of a change. And there can be some good things that come out of that, but boy, is it sure hard. And then another major one is habits. A lot of times the things, we can't continue living in the way that we always lived when our loved one was in our life. Um, it wouldn't work because it's such a huge change and a huge loss. So we've got to change our behavior and particularly our habits, the things that we develop that we end up doing automatically. Whenever you're going through major change, as I said, I don't want to paint this as to say like it's a good thing that your loved one died. Far from it. But um, because of the way that it impacts your life, it is a unique opportunity to develop good habits and an identity that is healthy and that works for you. It can go a number of ways. There are infinite possibilities, good and bad, which is why we're talking about this. Okay, 9 laws, and this is taken from the book. He has 10 laws. They have 10 laws. I combined 2 of them because they seem kind of redundant to me. So there's a law of sowing and reaping. Again, here you're talking about consequences. The things that the actions that I take have consequences, and I should reap what I sow, and other people should reap what they sow, as a rule of thumb. That's the way that it works in a healthy way in our society and our relationships. Law of responsibility. I mentioned this earlier as well. Where does my responsibility lie? What are the things that I am responsible to take care of at work, for instance? What's my job description? What are my roles in this organization? And where does that end and somebody else's begin? It's very easy for those lines to become too fuzzy so that you end up kind of taking care of everybody else's jobs. Or perhaps you're on the other side of that and you are not being responsible for the things that you should be responsible for, and missing out because of it, and negatively affecting the people around you. So whether it's at your job or whether it's in your relationships, to think about what's my responsibility, what is others. Power, and the way it's described in the book, I would say that this could also be said as control. So again, thinking about what do I actually have the power to do? What do the people in my life actually have the power to do? And to act, to see things clearly by taking these into consideration. All of these laws are really things that are just good to keep in mind as we live our lives with healthy boundaries. The law of respect. It is key and fundamental to be respected and to respect other people. And if disrespect is part of the situation, part of the equation, that's a sign that something needs to change, period. Yeah, I think that's enough said about that. Motivation. This is kind of tied to the last one, to think about what is motivating my actions, and to try to figure out, or to have a conversation with others about what is your motivation. Usually, uh, I think of the book and giving a biblical example of Jesus saying in one of the Gospels about judging a tree by its fruit, and how a bad tree will not produce good fruit, a good tree will not produce bad fruit. And so if your motivation, um, the starting place is off, um, bad things are going to follow. So some examples of common motivations for actions, especially, most of them are negative motivations. A fear of losing love, or a fear of abandonment. If you're acting out of that kind of fear, it's probably not going to yield good results. Fear of others' anger. If I am living my life with the motivation of not making other people angry, that's going to lead to an unhealthy life for me and for those other people. Unhealthy relationships. Fear of loneliness is a strong motivator. Um, sometimes people will allow very toxic people to remain in their life just because they fear being alone. And loneliness is hard. I mean, this if you're going through grief, but in some cases, it's preferable to the kinds of relationships that people maintain in their lives out of that fear. And I think you know what I'm talking about. Those people who are just taking and abusing. It's really better to be alone and to work towards building healthier relationships. You're not going to be able to find those healthy relationships very easily if you have these toxic people in your lives. The fear of not saying yes, of not seeing myself as somebody who always says yes, or other people seeing me as someone who always says yes. That can be an important part of my identity. And I can fear losing that. And so I say yes all the time. It's a unhelpful motivation. Your motivator could be guilt. Um, I feel like I'm doing this because I'm obligated to. We do have obligations and responsibilities and duties in our life, but there are many areas where we don't have to make the choices that we're making. And the obligations and the duties, the responsibilities, going back to number 2, they're not healthy, they're not appropriate, and we need to sort of, cut off that branch, so to speak, to prune it, and figure out how to make choices regardless of our guilt, so that we can not have that obligation that is unhealthy in our life anymore. Payback. Now, I suppose this could be taken to mean like I owe a debt to somebody, where maybe they feel that we don't owe a debt to them or something like that. I don't know. But I think that this is mostly talking about like revenge kind of payback. And anytime that that's your motivator, that's not going to work out well for you or for the other person involved. We need to find ways to let go of that need for vengeance and to set healthy boundaries. Getting distance is often a better answer than acting violently, whether it's physical violence or some other type of violence towards others, because that just continues to escalate. The motivation of approval. I will not be approved of or accepted or a valuable person to this other person if I don't act in this way. If that's your motivator, that's a problem. We need to have relationships where we can approve of one another, to be able to know that we're approved of and to approve of them, regardless of their behavior, assuming that they're not acting in harmful ways. Over-identification with someone else. Oh, what's going on here? Okay, I'm sorry about that. Over-identification with someone else's feelings. So it's important to identify with one another's feelings. It's essentially called empathy, putting yourself in their shoes, and you can literally feel what they feel a lot of times. That can be a great and important skill to have. We really need more of that in our society, but there are many people who over-identify. So I had an example recently in my life where I had to confront somebody about something, and I knew that they were going to be hurt by me confronting them about this, because it was going to maybe challenge their view of themselves. They're going to know that they hurt me, and I know they care about me, and so it's going to make them feel bad to know that they hurt me. But I chose to confront them anyway, because the thing they were doing, I don't think they realized they were doing, and it was harming me and just bad for our relationship. And so I chose to confront them about it, and that person did share that it hurt me for you to say that. And I said, um, I'm sorry that this hurt you. I didn't want it to hurt you, but I don't know how else I could have said this, and it's something that needed to be said. Um, so, but if we over-identify, if it's like their pain is my pain to such a high level, I can't bring myself to do the thing that I need to do. That's over-identification. And then there's the motivator of love and freedom. And anytime that love and or freedom for yourself and for the people who you relate to is your motivation, most likely things are going to go well, especially if that's their motivator as well. If that's both of your motivators, you're going to be able to almost certainly find a solution and relate in ways that are healthy. Okay, well, moving on with these different laws. Value labels. Value as in this is good, this is bad, and saying that something is better or worse, sort of automatically putting a label on it where there shouldn't be a label. Sometimes the thing, well, going back to that example from my own life recently, hurting this person in my life, if I had said that is a bad thing and I need to avoid hurting them at all costs, then I wouldn't have been able to say what needed to be said, and that person may have continued to behave in that way that was hurtful for me and for our relationship. And it would have been, again, bad results. I keep thinking about what's the fruit that's coming from the tree. And if the fruit is bad, if the results are bad, there's something that needs to be changed in that system and in that relationship. So we need to understand that sometimes the hurt that other people experience when we set up healthy boundaries can actually lead to good things. Now, there's a difference between, the book talks about how there's a difference between hurting and harming, and that those things really could mean the same thing depending on your context. But the context of the book, they talk about how hurt is sort of a feeling that somebody has. Again, I can't control other people's feelings. Harm has to do with my actions, harming somebody, doing something for the purpose of causing them pain. That is not healthy, acceptable, or good way to live your life. But to do things that cause other people to hurt, in some cases, especially when you're talking about healthy boundaries, that can actually be a good thing. So we need to be careful about automatically calling something bad or good, better or worse, without considering what the results are and whether our boundaries are healthy. Proactivity over reactivity, and I think this is where I combined a couple of the laws here, but living our lives, in ways that are intentional. As I talked about earlier, thinking about what is important to me, what is important in the situation, and let me be proactive and set things up in my life and take actions that allow me to focus on those values and to have those things that are important to me be a part of my life. And after you go through a loss, that reactivity comes very naturally, because your mind is struggling to figure out what in the world is going on in my life. This is also different. This is also painful and hard. I have so many changes and adjustments. I'm just going to sort of go with the flow as much as possible. And in some cases, you might need to do that as a way of self-care and ask other people to help take care of things for you for a while. But that can also get out of hand, and we can get stuck in that system of just being reactive, not being proactive. And we can look at our life maybe a year down the road, however long it might be, and ask, how did I get here? And it's because we didn't take any proactivity in our life. So as with everything else, there's a balance between what's realistic and what you can do when it comes to this. Envy. And in the book, he talks about how, or I should say they, I keep saying he, but there are two authors. They talk about how when we feel envious towards someone, when we want what they have, and we recognize that we want what they have, and we don't have it, and we can't get it right now, that should be sort of a red flag that goes up. And instead of sort of stewing and marinating in that envy, which causes harm to our relationship with that person, we can ask, okay, realistically, how can I obtain that thing in my life, or what that thing represents to me? How can I actually take steps, and how can I make a plan to do that? Um, and it's possible in some cases that I cannot obtain that thing or what it represents to me. And so the question becomes, how can I learn to let go of the need for that thing and focus on those things that I do have or that I can obtain, those areas where I can grow? It's a much more positive way of reacting to our feeling of envy than holding on to it. Okay, and then the last one here is the law of exposure. And this is a law that I try to keep as a part of my life as much as I can and continually try to improve in it. And that is basically keeping everything above ground, keeping everything exposed and in the light. Anytime you're acting in secrecy and in dishonesty, even if you feel like it's to protect the other person, usually that's, I would say, at least 99% of the time, that's not going to lead to something good. And the same goes for other people acting in secrecy toward us. It's best to have everything out in the light so that we can all see things for the way they are, and have integrity in our lives, and being able to focus on those things that are important. Okay, boundaries in family. Again, coming into the holiday season, a lot of us are interacting with family a little bit even more regularly than usual. And boundaries are especially important and especially difficult in family. I don't know if I'd say especially important. They're always important in our life, but they are especially difficult for most of us. And a lot of that has to do with the roles that we have in our family, the roles of father, of mother, of brother, of sister, um, and of cousin, of aunt, of uncle, of grandparent, of grandchild, of child. These are roles that, by definition, within most families, take place starting at a very early age for some of the people, or during a major transition for some of the adults there. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, in some cases, to completely let go of those roles. So it's important to recognize that and to ask, how are those roles coming into play here? And is that appropriate? Is my parent treating me as an adult as if I am a child who needs to be have everything done for them, or who doesn't have any idea about what real life is like? Or maybe I'm the parent in that situation, or a brother and sister. You need to do this because we're family. Well, loyalty and loyalty towards and love and respect towards our family, and honoring one another, those can be very good and important things, but there comes a time where it becomes unhealthy, and this is simply an unhealthy relationship, and we don't have healthy boundaries here. Those things need to be present. The healthy boundaries need to be present regardless of whether you're family or not. It's not an excuse for unhealthy boundaries. And again, after a loss, this is especially important to think about those roles, how they're coming into play, and whether boundaries are not healthy or effective in our life. And there's the issue of triangulation, and this can take place outside of a family. It often does, but I would say it usually is found within a family. Triangulation is simply when somebody else and I have some kind of a conflict or a problem that we're trying to work on effectively or ineffectively. We bring in a third party, and it's in a way that is unhealthy. It's like, hey, you person with authority, or you person who has nothing to do with the situation, but you know us both, and you're important to us both. Essentially, come onto my team. Tell him that I'm right, or what do you think about this? And that's just not appropriate. You and the person who have the conflict are the ones who need to work it out, if at all possible. Now, there might be times where it's the right choice to bring in a third party, but a third party who actually has the role to help solve some of these conflicts. It might be a counselor, a spiritual leader, some kind of a mitigator. Perhaps there is somebody who is in your family who it actually is appropriate for them to step in. But usually when you're talking about family or casual friendships, that's not going to be the appropriate person to bring in when the two of you don't solve the conflict. And usually when triangulation is happening, it happens before at least one of the people has given a real effort into solving the conflict, examining themselves and figuring out, might there be a way that I need to change and compromise here? Okay, some tips for resolving conflict. Um, Identify the symptom. What's the actual situation here? Let's be clear about what's going on. Identify the conflict that is causing the symptom. So the question is, okay, here are the facts about what's going on, but what is really going on beneath the surface? What are the ways that we're relating? Are you treating me like your little brother when really you need to be treating me as a peer? As the case may be. Of course, that's just one example of a million that could be there. But what is actually happening? Do you feel like you're not being heard? There are a lot of things where if you just look at the surface, the symptoms, you're going to miss the actual conflict and the process of what's really happening. Identify the need driving the conflict. That speaks for itself, especially again when you take into consideration you can substitute need for goal or value. What is the thing that I'm trying to accomplish that is important to me? And then step 4 is focus on meeting the needs while keeping everyone safe, physically, mentally, emotionally, etc., while having healthy boundaries, essentially. Are there ways that our needs can be met here? The needs that are driving this conflict that are going to work well for everybody. Well, okay, so that might involve compromise, or it might involve just looking at things from a different point of view, coming up with a solution you didn't see previously, now that you have identified the symptom, the conflict beneath that, and the need beneath that. And then again, responding versus reacting. So this speaks to, I say again, because it speaks to the point earlier about proactivity versus reactivity. When I think about a reaction, I think about something that is automatic and usually instant. If somebody says something that sort of, they say a phrase that triggers something disconnected in my life, and I sort of blow up at them, that's a reaction. That's something that happens without me actually thinking about what's really going on. This isn't the person who that trigger is related to. This is somebody who is, more kind and loving towards me. If I actually take the time to think that through, I'm responding. I'm being intentional. So it might look like going into another room, getting space for 15 minutes, thinking, breathing, perhaps taking a nap, and then you're able to respond in a way that is intentional and more effective. Okay, forgiveness and boundaries. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here just because of time. We're already running over 45 minutes. But the idea is that, forgiveness has a lot to do with boundaries and the importance of forgiving. And there's a whole conversation on forgiving. I could do multiple sessions just on forgiveness, so I won't get into it. But basically, forgiving is not the same thing as forgetting. It's not the same thing as absolving. Forgiveness has to do with what I'm carrying within my own heart towards you. Do I wish what is good for you in your life? Do I hold something against you and keep up this sort of wall in our relationship, or am I going to bring that wall down so that we can relate in a healthy way? Now that might mean if somebody is acting violently in some way towards you, again, physical violence or otherwise, if they're being toxic in your life, you might need some space from that person. You might need some healthy boundaries, but there's a difference between having a healthy boundary up in your life and holding somebody's action as like, this is the focus of our relationship. What we're doing there is causing a problem for ourselves. I've heard the analogy before of, we think sometimes when we're not forgiving somebody else that it's like we've got them by a leash, when in reality the leash is around our own neck. And so by finding a way to forgive somebody, which can be very hard work and take some time, what we're actually doing is setting ourselves free. Now, I use the term, and I really like this, and a couple of the guys identified with it, so that's why I wanted to not skip this slide. This term rent-free, it's become a little bit more common of a term. I see it on social media sometimes, and the idea is, if somebody, this has a lot to do with unforgiveness. If somebody acted a way towards me, let's say somebody in high school um, bullied me, and I think about that person who I haven't seen in years, and I think about what a jerk they are, and if I knew them what I knew now, this is what I would say to them, and all these kinds of things. You've all been there, I'm sure, at some point. Um, that person who I've never seen and probably never will see, almost certainly won't have a relationship with in the future, just because logistically and the way as our lives are headed, I don't even know where they live. Um, that person is still living in my head. They're taking up space in my head rent free. They're not paying a dime, and so I need to evict them. But that has to do with unforgiveness. You can see how that unforgiveness, that inability, or that choice not to forgive, is harming me, and they have no idea. They have no idea maybe that they even hurt me. They have no idea. They certainly have no idea that I still think about their existence or think about what's going on. That takes up valuable time and energy in my day. Relating in ways that are, oh, by the way, just based on an example that somebody gave in the group, this can even affect the way you live your life. Maybe you do know where that person lives, or you do know what company they're a part of, and you are taking significant action in your life to avoid that, uh, even if you don't necessarily need to interact with that person. Maybe you can be near them, but have healthy boundaries so that um, you aren't actually around them. Or maybe that person isn't going to hurt you in those ways anymore, but because of this unforgiveness, there's just a million different examples I can come up with of possibilities. But it's just, somebody had brought up how um, he is living where he lives partly as a result of something that somebody did to him that they don't even seem to be aware that they did. And so that's an example, as he shared, about allowing them to live rent free in his life. He's making significant choices in his life based on something that they have no idea about. And so, finding a way to move past that and to let that go while maintaining healthy boundaries with that person is going to free him up to make decisions regardless of that other person who's living rent free right now. Okay, here's what this is all about: relating in ways that are loving, healthy, and with pure motives. That's what boundaries are about. It's not about getting back at somebody. It's not about being selfish. It's about having these healthy relationships that are filled with love and pure motives. I mean, what better goal could you hope for? What better goal could you work toward? That's the importance of boundaries. So that's all that I've got. Thank you for bearing with me. It was a longer presentation, both on Tuesday as well as today. And I thank you for listening. I hope that this has given you something helpful to think about moving forward in your life, perhaps to a current situation. Perhaps you'll think of something from this in a future situation. Again, especially something might come up during the holidays, as I addressed about family. And I think in particularly, if you're going through grief, about the ways that these are important and the ways that these are even more relevant in your life after your loss. Again, I hope that you found it helpful. Please feel free to share it with somebody else if you think it might be helpful. And I certainly invite you to join us. Again, my email address is wlawton@hom.org. And my phone number, if you'd like to get in touch with me with questions, if you want to register for one of our groups, 586-263-8514. That's all on our website, which is HOM, Hospice of Michigan, HOM.org. And at the top, you can click grief support and see all of our resources there, including a link to all of our groups. So thank you again for your time. And I hope that your Thanksgiving, your Christmas, your Hanukkah, maybe you don't celebrate any of this, but this special season goes well for you, goes smoothly, that you can have healthy relationships and grow closer to the people who you love. Thanks.